Hello friends, and welcome back to MSFS Flight Plans. I'm Nick, and just so there is no confusion whatsoever, this is not a place where you come for flight lessons. We don't do plane reviews, not very often anyway, nor do we discuss sim updates and breaking news. The only reason I made this channel is just to show you and tell you about all kinds of cool places in this world of ours. How and what you choose to fly, if you want to see them for yourself, is completely up to you. And of course, there's a reason why I'm making that oddly placed disclaimer, which I'll share with you before we're done today. So this is a brand new location for me. Like, I've never been here before, and I would have never checked it out if not for the recommendation of one of our channel members. We are in the Sultanate of Oman, and this place is surreal in every sense of the word. The history, the culture, government, landscape, the architecture, everything out here is a wonderland, and I just cannot wait to show it to you guys. As you can see, I've hauled out an old warbird, which is actually a new release. It's the F-86 Sabre by Shrike, which is the economy class of MilViz. Shrike is anyway. They're a smaller division of MilViz. And those guys have just totally crushed it again. This thing is easily on par with some of the more expensive planes in the sim. And if I'm being honest, maybe even better than a few of them. So you can see we've got our little external generator going. And again, I'm not going to give you the full walkthrough of what we're doing to start it up, but I will tell you kind of how a few things operate. So if you just switch to external power, that's what throws that little generator out there. And then to get her started up, all we have to do is turn the engine master on and then switch this button from off. So we'll eventually move it up to battery, but we have to turn the starter on. So we'll move that down one notch. It'll start getting spooled up, and then once this gets to 3%, then we just have to move this over to the inboard position, and you can do that by clicking here. You can't do it with your throttle. If you move your throttle, it'll just go up. So you'll click right here, which I'm going to do in a second, and then that'll slide that over, and it will start the startup procedure. But look at the interior detailing on this thing. Amazing. I mean, this is as good as the top shelf stuff from MilViz. I don't know what they're talking about with the economy class. Almost everything in here works. Just unbelievable. Okay, so let's slide that in. See how it just kicked over there? And then once this gets to, well, we're already ready to go, we can just take it right out of that by moving the throttle forward a little bit. And it starts up. Okay, while that's running up, as you're going to hear, when you shut the canopy, the sound changes. Another wonderful benefit. All right, what else do I need to do? Move the, let's just take care of it now before we look at the Google Maps. So move the starter back to battery, which is just up one position because it shifts back to off. Turn the external power off, and then just reset the flight controls, which is this switch right here. Good. Okay, oh, by the way, this is a freeware add-on airport, way better than the default. So I will link that in the video description along with this flight plan if you want to take it just like we're taking it. And this is the only add-on that I've got in here. There is one available for the landing airport. I had it in and took it back out for reasons I'll tell you about in just a little bit. I think there's some kind of conflict going on, but let's check out the Google map real quick. All right, let's zoom out a little bit here. You probably recognize the Arabian Peninsula there. So here's Oman. And Muscat up here is the capital, which is where we're taking off just west of that. So the airport is probably somewhere around here. We're going to take off this way, come up here because we need to get some altitude because some of the scenery down here is not phenomenal when you're up close. All of the landscape is incredible. Some of the structures aren't great. So we're going to come out here over the coast, try to get to about 6,000 feet. Then we'll cruise along, look at the city from the 6,000 foot level. Then we'll come down here, cruise around a couple of different landmarks out this way. And the best part of the flight, for me anyway, is we're going to come into this little mountain range here, which just looks unbelievable. So there's a little pass that we're going to just come in right here, and then we'll pull up in this way and then cut across a tiny little notch in the mountains by Al-Awabi right there. And this thing here is like a big bowl. So we'll just do a little mock loop right up close to the edge of that, spit ourselves out on the other side here, and then our landing airport's going to be right around this vicinity, probably about 25 minutes or so in the air. Okay, so I think everything's in pretty good shape. Let's go ahead and get this baby fired up. And I just cannot believe how much better this airport looks. And I'm kind of wondering if I can squeeze myself around that pole there without tagging it. I think I'm going to drive around it because I don't want to risk snagging a wing on it. All right, parking brake off. And this plane has a lot of quirks. A lot of fun to fly. You really got to take it up a few times before you can figure it out. And you got to give it almost full throttle to get it going. And then once you're in the air, the throttle has a total hair trigger. You can move it maybe a ½ inch back and it'll drop out of that little green range there over there on the right. So you really have to just barely feather that thing once you get up. Oh my gosh, this looks so much better. I mean, none of that stuff in front of us was there. The deflectors weren't there. The markings weren't there. The fence wasn't there. Way better. So while we're cruising down here, the reason why I made that disclaimer about this not being a flight lesson channel is I was watching and you see this happen every now and then if you ever read the comments, which I rarely do, on other people's channels anyway. Look at that. That looks so much better. One of the big sim guys, you'd recognize the name if I say it, but I'm not going to draw attention to it, had just produced a video, uploaded a video about the new weather app release that apparently is a little bit underwhelming. And down in the comments, most of them were very positive, thanking the guy for putting the video up there. Somebody said, the fact that you took off with the wind completely, something to the effect of, completely ruins any trust for anything you have to say. You know, he used a couple profane words, and I was like, wow. Wow, wow, wow. And he cited some other instances of this particular creator doing that, which means he's watched other videos that the guys put up. And I never comment on other people's pages, never respond to comments, never want to start any trouble with anybody, but I just couldn't help myself. So ridiculous. And the reason why I'm mentioning all that is because I've been accosted a few times, really even since this channel. Nobody was really a jerk about it like that guy was. But there's a faction within the sim community that considers anything less than absolute perfection with every flight, every manipulation of the controls, obeying every single regulation for the airspace. Anything less than that is just, you should be banned from the sim community. And I get wanting to fly with that level of detail. I went through a whole phase like that where I was all about absolute realism. But you've probably noticed there aren't a lot of real popular YouTube channels where guys are flying with that level of precision, because it can make for very long, very boring flights unless you're the one flying the plane. So again, if that's what you're looking for on this channel, you are going to be very disappointed. I'm doing this following most of the procedures, not necessarily obeying airspace rules since I have all the traffic turned off. I'm not flying with anybody else. Just trying to get a cool sightseeing flight, and if you guys want to fly it however the heck you want, have at it. But it's a shame that there is a section of the community that's like, that's their tribe, like their identity is precision in the sim, and any violators of that code somehow are deficient enough to not even be a part of the community, which I just do not get. There are so many different people who fly for so many different reasons and so many different styles. Just let everybody do what they want. If you don't like the channel, just don't ever come back. But this guy had obviously been back many times because he was citing many other videos. All right, here's our runway right here, so we'll just throw one notch of flaps out and then light the fires. So let's see, for anyone curious, after mentioning all that, we do have a 4-knot direct crosswind from the right here, which won't be too bad at all. And this plane's interesting. It takes a while to get up to speed, and this is a nice long runway, which looks, again, so much better now. But once it starts to get a positive rate of climb, it takes a little while to get itself up in the air. So we go full throttle here, one notch of flaps out. Check our barrel real quick. Good to go. And we're rolling. So once you come up, I'm going to leave the gears out a little bit longer than I normally would, just because you're not quite sure it's actually going to make it up into the air. And then as soon as you bring the gears up, you can throw the flaps back down. So the rotate speed's about 135 knots on this thing, and that white line right down here on our airspeed indicator is where we'll start to nose up, but it will nose up on its own once we hit that spot. So that front wheel's just starting to come up a little bit there. And a little back pressure on the stick. And now it's just going to kind of hang for a minute. Alright, now we're going gears up, flaps up. So again, while we're close to the ground, you'll see some wavy looking roads. It's all default scenery out here, so the structures aren't going to look great. But at the end, I will give you a tour on the satellite map, because there is some stuff you want to see what it looks like in real life out here. Just incredible. So anyone who's been around for a while knows I'm not ashamed to admit the limits of my knowledge, and those limits seem to be getting more obvious with each new flight that we take. I didn't even know there was a country called Oman before I came out here. In hindsight, I probably have heard it mentioned before, but I think I may have been assuming that people were always referring to Oman, which is the capital of Jordan, which is kind of in this vicinity, I guess. But it turns out Oman is not only its own country, but has been around for quite a while. In fact, it is the oldest continuously independent state in the Middle East. You got to trim down hard and long on this thing to get to level flight. All right, let's pull that throttle back just the tiniest little bit, and that'll get us to the top of that green band there over on the right. Here's our RPMs over here, so that was, I mean, I literally moved it 1/4 of an inch and it went down that much. So we'll bring it back up a little bit. And I don't know if it's accurately modeled or not, but if you look at our turn coordinator there, if you touch the pedals at all, which I'm not doing right now, the ball starts to move out of the appropriate range. So I'm just going to fly it without the pedals, because look, I'm going to give it some left pedal now. Just a little bit of left pedal and we're out of the range there, so I'm just going to leave it as it is. Maybe it self-corrects. And this place isn't just some desert backwater either. As you're about to see, this place is rocking right along. Alright, so just kind of VFRing myself here. There's the coast that we're trying to get down to, so we'll just come along this way here. In 2010, the United Nations Development Program ranked Oman as the most improved country in the world over the preceding 40 years. And the World Bank categorizes it as a high-income economy, and I couldn't really find what the parameters of that were, but as you'll see in a minute, they're obviously doing all right out here. And as of 2023, it ranks as the 48th most peaceful country in the world. And to give you an idea of what that means in more relatable terms, the UK is 37th, and the United States is ranked at 131, which, aside from being among the many decaying metrics in the US, is apparently due mostly to our incidence of violent crime. See that road down there? Not quite right, but the landscape out here is phenomenal. Top tier. Really top tier, and this isn't even the best of it. Wait till we get in those mountains to the south. The etymology of the country's name likely points to the Arabic word Aman, which means settled people, differentiating this place from the nomadic Bedouin tribes in the region. And we'll get back to the ancient history a little bit later, but I want to preface what we're about to see, which all appears to be fairly recent, and again, incredibly opulent. So the city we're flying over now is Muscat, which is also the capital. And this country is ruled by a hereditary absolute monarchy, which is known as a sultanate in these parts. And as easy as it would be to criticize a system like that, I don't really feel entitled to criticize anything when we're ranked almost 100 slots behind them on the World Peace Index. But their human rights track record out here isn't phenomenal. Apparently torture and censorship is still a big thing, and slavery was only banned in 1970. But women can vote. I think they started instituting that in 1993. Just not on the person holding all the power, but neither can anyone else. But like most of the Middle East, oil exports are what's propping up most of this country's economy, accounting for over 80% of their annual revenue out here. Alright, so we're at 5,000 feet now. I'm just going to try to get up to 6,000 before we get out over here and loop around the northern side of the coast. Look at this stuff down here. Once you get high enough, obviously default stuff, but very believable. Once you get away from those wavy roads. And there are forts and castles everywhere out here. Pretty much every little mountain pass has old forts, some of them very old. And because it's so dry out here, most of them appear to be in pretty good shape. Look at that big complex down there. And I'll show all those to you, at least as many as I could find on the map when we're done. So as we come around here, I'm just going to show you all the big places that kind of stuck out to me. Almost all of them are government offices, with a few resorts, but they spared no expense on anything that either belongs to the Sultan or anyone who works for him. And this coastline looks amazing. Really good. One of the best coastlines I've seen in the sim. We'll get a little bit of popping. Other than that, it looks really good. Alright, so now we can start trimming down some because we're at almost 7,000 feet, which is fine. Look at that scenery down there. The guy who recommended this flight said you can see every little boulder and everything on the ground, and he is right. You'll see, we'll take a low pass through these mountains, and you'll see just how detailed it is, even up close. A few perma-shadows, but again, I've got the sunset where it won't really jump out at you. Those are the shadows that don't disappear when you move the sun around. Alright. Just keep on coming down. We don't want to get up to 10,000 feet. Although the view from here is amazing. Okay, so this thing looks a little bit wavy. That's about the last of the waviness that we'll see once we get around the coast. And it's so strange how they do have some green areas out here like this. So this is a gigantic government building here. This is a government building. Right down here, which rendered flat, this is a big Ritz-Carlton. But look at this coastline. Mountains right down to the water. I'm just going to keep kind of glancing over at my artificial horizon just to see how we're tracking for going up or down. Got a couple ports out here, and I have the graphics cranked. Every metric is cranked through the roof, and the shipping traffic's turned on. But man, you throw a few static aircraft on the ground, that'll just kill it. I tried to liven that airport even more by throwing it at 25%. Frame rates dropped from the 60s into the 20s. Terrible. Alright, right down here, this is one of the Sultan's palaces, this big area right here. And there's a little fort right there, which we're too high to see, and another fort over here, one of the smaller ones in the region. And this little thing right here is their national museum, and they got all kinds of museums and theaters and stuff out here. But this whole area here is a palace for the Sultan. Look at this area. Look at that. This is their big port here. And right up here, this thing sticking out in the water is a big oil terminal. So we're going to come out here, cut right in through here. That's where we're going to get into the mountains over that way. But there's a few things I want to point out to you as we come around. All right, we're at 10,000, which is way too high. That's fine. We're going to come back down. All right, so this area here is a huge, they call it a natural park, but this thing here, this oval-shaped thing, if you got a big enough screen, you can see it, is a big amphitheater on this end, and then a huge theme park right over here that they built up, and there's a couple theme parks around here too. And they got another little amphitheater over here, and I'll try to remember to spot out some of these other gigantic government buildings, and you can tell the disparity between the Sultanate, or the Sultan and everybody else, because the places that aren't big at all. A lot of golf courses out here. Alright, so let's go ahead and start coming back on down a little bit. So here's the oil terminal. They got a bunch of huge malls out here. The university that we'll see in just a minute. Look at that landscape. The live weather looked about like this, but it was just a little bit more hazy, so I put on the desert sky setting for AccuSeason, which looks almost the same, just with less haze and a little bit less wind. Alright, so there's our airport again. And let's see if we can see the stadium from here. I think this is it right here, but it's kind of flat, which is why I didn't draw attention to it before as we were coming around. Got some boats out there. And there must be a lot of leisure boats, because when I'm looking at little nav map here, it is just packed with boats, but I can't see too many out here, so they must be pretty small. Not a lot of big tankers or transports. There's another huge golf course. Look at that. I bet they get a lot of dignitaries and highfalutin politicians coming out here to party it up with this guy. And the guy that ruled for 40 years out here, the last Sultan, died, I think, 2020, and he did not have a son. So I think his nephew is the guy that's taken over, and they've got a lot of stuff named after the old guy out here. Alright, so I want to come down here by, this is a huge dam, which on all the satellite maps is dry, but I think it catches all the runoff that comes down through this area right here. And we got lucky enough to have a little bit of water in there, which makes it easier to spot if you're VFR flying. So over here on the right is a massive palace complex that I'm about to show you. Just absolutely huge. The biggest I've seen anywhere. But we got to get over here just a little bit first. So I think I'm going to go ahead and pick up that marinas pack from the guy from MAMU Designs that I mentioned on one of the previous videos, which supposedly adds a lot of boats to a lot of marinas. I bought one for like $4 in the sim probably 6 months ago, and I didn't really notice much of a difference, but his apparently is supposed to do most of the world, throwing boats in all of the marinas and little harbors. I want to check that out. And he also does that cable car pack, which I'm going to get that thing too, for sure. We've flown over so many sites with cable cars that we couldn't see. Alright, I'm just going to turn this way and then back to the right so you can see this. Alright, so this whole green thing here is a palace complex. And right down here, just to kind of show you how things go out here, these are prisons, and this is all within the palace complex, so you can see this wall. So that's a prison, this is the university over here, and this whole thing is a palace complex for the Sultan. Is that crazy or what? Alright, this is where the scenery starts to look really good, really believable. No bendy roads, no flat buildings. Another thing that surprised me was this country's military stature. In 2020, Oman spent 11% of its GDP on defenses and security, making it the largest for that metric in the world. The US, by comparison, usually hovers around 5% of GDP, which is absolute dollars. I'm sure the US is spending more. But a more telling figure, however, is that the way that that money is allocated out here, in 2006, they had around 44,000 people serving in the military, and over 6,000 of them were in the Royal Security Detail. This thing is a camel racing track. I couldn't find out any other information about it. It's called the Al Foulage Racecourse. But I saw the pictures, and it was nothing but camels, and that is huge. That is a really big racecourse. That'd be big for cars. Never mind horses or camels. But it looks great. There's a big castle over here. We're not going to fly over that way because we'd have to do a loop to do it, and we're trying to get down this mountain pass. There's a castle here I'll show you at the end. And out here is a huge state police complex, which is also just massive. Okay, so I'm going to come down here because I think the biggest... this is a... is that it? Yeah, this is it. This is a big... no, it's up here. This is a huge chicken raising complex with chicken coops out here in the middle of the desert. I think our best shot at seeing the biggest castle is going to be in this green spot down here, and I was too high to see it before, but if we're going to be able to see any on this flight, it's going to be right down there. So we'll fly low and fast, of course, and see if we can pick it out. Some of the castles look very obviously like castles. This one has the outer wall and the turrets you can still see, but the inside of it has, I don't know if it was originally really built up with lots of little structures inside of it, or if it was always like that, or if they've done that more recently or what. But we should be able to see some of the outer walls, so we'll take a look at that as we're coming around here. Look at how detailed that is. Man, to get Iran looking as good as it did, and now this, I'm going to take back everything I said about the Middle East, though some parts are still really, really bad, but this is great. And of course, at some point, we'll get out to Dubai. Check that stuff out. I've done some flyovers without any add-ons out there. I didn't think it really looked that great until you start putting the add-ons in. I think this looks a lot better, if I'm being honest. Alright, I got to get this angle just right. Alright, so right down here in this little tip of brown amidst that green is where the castle structures would be. And they call them all forts out here, even though they definitely look more like castles. And some of these things, again, are really old. And everything on Google was in Arabic, so I could not get many details. Most of them didn't have their own wiki page. Alright, what do we got here? Alright, so you can just barely see that little triangular thing right there with some turrets on it, and then the outer wall coming around here. Yeah, you actually can see it. That's a wall there, and then it comes all around the outside here, but you can see there's a lot of little stuff in there too. Making it hard to see everything else. Alright, we gotta do a hard turn here, pull some G's. And I'm using the pedals regardless of what that little ball's doing down there, because that's how you fly every single other plane. And we're doing alright. These mountains up here to our right are really as reddish brown as they appear in here as well. That is accurate. I don't know why there's so many different colors on these mountains. I'm sure different composition of the rocks. Look at that little mine over there. Just fantastic. Okay, so right down here to our left, you see that big circle? All I could find out about that, this thing here, is it's a military base of some kind. And there's not a lot in it other than that big circle and that one little building. So I don't know what they're doing out there. Okay, we got to come up here by this little town of Alawabi. And the only thing I could find out about that is apparently they got some really, really old writings that they had written on flat rocks, which survive a lot better than parchment. So they apparently have gleaned quite a bit of interesting ancient history from that stuff. Alright, here's Alawabi. So we got to come up here, and then there's this pass right here. We're going to come nice and low and cut through there, and then we'll enter the bowl over here. And right when we come in this way, if you look over here, that's called the Hajar Range. And we're going to fly right towards and then right past its highest peak called Jebel Akhdar, which at just a little over 9,700 feet is the highest point in Oman. An interesting footnote about that place is an opposing political faction retreated to that mountain and had dust up with the Sultan in the 1950s. But fortunately, the Brits, who had a very keen interest in this region's oil, were all too willing to help the Sultan out, dropping over 1,000 pounds of bombs on that mountain, eventually driving the troublemakers out. Look at that detail down there. The mountains, the structures, everything. Okay, let's get nice and low here. Look at this over here. It's like a piece of sandpaper. Unbelievable. So, let's see. This would be the big mountain right here. Doesn't really stick out above everything else because it's not that much higher than everything else. And originally I was coming into a little airport. I mean, really little. The runway is like 2,000 feet. Tucked over the top of this mountain over here. I'll show you that at the end, because if you don't mind taking a longer flight in a smaller plane, it is really cool to land at, and a real landing challenge too. I'll show you where that is, but we just could not do it in this thing. Alright, so I gotta focus on flying this thing because we're gonna be zipping around the corners of these mountains, checking out all these sights. So I think those are the actual in-sim shadows over there. Those would move when I was changing the sun around. And even though some of these towns down here, like this one we're going to fly over to our right, seem awfully remote, they are in the tourism business out here too. A lot of them will have little resorts, including that little runway that I'll show you at the end, the 2,000-foot one. And of course a lot of mosques. Something else, isn't it, guys? And you really can see every little boulder down there. Amazing. Just absolutely love it. So my terrain level of detail is set at 250. My object level of detail is maxed out. I've got everything else on ultra, except for the windshield effects, because sometimes those can be so reflective that it makes it hard to see stuff. And when we're coming in, I may turn this bomb sight off because it's really obstructive, and you got to keep a real nose-up attitude as you're coming in, but I just feel like that's so disingenuous to have that GPS thing there, so for now we'll leave it up. And you can load this thing out with bombs and stuff if you want to. You can change the payload weights. It'll throw some bombs out there, but we're not doing any of that stuff right now. Alright, so we're going to skirt the inside of these mountains and come through that notch over there to our right. And we'll get a nice look at this little town as we come by, which also, of course, has some old forts and castles. Not so many in the open spaces, but anytime there's a little elevation along a mountain pass, they're all over the place. That is insanely good. Really, really good. So thank you so much. I won't mention the member's name on YouTube because I don't know if he wants me to, but you know who you are. And you are now in the competition. Number 2 of 3 for our quarterly flight recommendation competition. And while we have a second, also mention that if you want to be a part of that, and even if you don't, you should join our Discord server. We have all kinds of fun in there, great conversations. Group flights, fly-alongs, just chit-chatting in general. I'll put the link for that in our video description along with our one add-on that we've got for this and the link for the flight plan. Alright, so I just need to kind of keep an eye on the little nav map here to my left so I can make sure I get lined up for our approach correctly. And while I'm doing that, some quick ancient history before we get to our destination, which also has an interesting story behind it. I think anyone would probably assume this area has a pretty deep history from the start, but in 2011... archaeologists discovered a bunch of stone tools in an area known as the Arabian-Nubian complex. And once they analyzed the artifacts, they dated them to roughly 106,000 years old. And prior to that discovery, tools like that had only been found in the Horn of Africa, which is kind of close, I guess. It's about 1,000 miles away from here, to the west. And if you haven't seen any of our other previous African flights, I'll mention again that roughly every 21,000 years, the desert turns into a lush wetland and back again, which means they've seen several of those cycles as humans have been roaming around out here. And since we have just a few more minutes, I didn't know if I'd get to it, but we did, so that's great. I'll give you a few interesting notes about this plane. The first Sabres rolled off the line of North American aviation in 1949 as the first swept-wing fighter that could hang with the MiG-15. Which it did on numerous occasions during the Korean War of Northern Aggression. And the production run lasted from 49 to 56, banging out a total of 9,860, making it the most produced U.S. fighter in history by a very large margin. And it set a world speed record of 671 miles an hour on September 15th of 1948, which, if you were paying close attention, is a year before they started producing these, so I'm guessing that was probably a prototype. And then 5 years later, Jackie Cochran became the first woman to break the sound barrier, flying a Sabre Mark III alongside Chuck Yeager. Not in the cockpit with her, there's only one seat in this thing, but he must have been her wingman. Alright, so this airbase up here, the place we're coming into, it's called Rustak Air Base. And it's a bit of an enigma to me. It's called Rustak, and it has an ICAO code of OOAS in the sim, but in real life it's OORQ. So, of course, I had to see what that's all about. And I couldn't confirm this anywhere else, but there is an add-on, again, which I did not include, at flightsim.to, and on that page they said this was an auxiliary landing strip for the space shuttle back in the day. And the length in the sim is marked at just over 13,000 feet, which is about 2,000 feet shorter than the strip out at Kennedy. But you're going to see they have a displaced threshold on each end, which would probably get it in the ballpark if you use the whole thing. And the add-on looked pretty good, but when I put it in here, it drew all the markings, but it was still over the natural landscape, so it was just bucking me up and down in the air, jumping over the hills and stuff, so I had to take it back out, which was too bad because it looked pretty good, so I don't know what happened between then and now. Alright, so you got to come in really hot with this thing and really high, and we're going to throw out the speed brake, which you're supposed to leave out all the way down. Get the flaps out. The gear speed is like 150 knots, so we got to slow way down, but I want to stay high, so I'm going to start trimming up again. That's our gear warning, which I have mapped to a button to shut off. And you can see that comes on pretty early. Alright, so I'll go ahead and throw out our speed brakes. I actually want to get a little bit closer. I'm going to see if I can do this with that bomb sight still on there. You can tell it's hard to see that thing. See that big white strip there? So the threshold's on the other side of that, and there's one at the other end too. Alright, we got to slow down enough to get the gears out, so speed brake out. See the speed brake there? The little American star insignia? What a cool looking plane. Come on, baby, keep slowing down. Come on. And we can come in really hot with this thing. And you almost have to give it full throttle once you start to plane out. Because between that speed brake and the flaps, it'll get really slowed down. So I don't know if the gears will come out. We'll go ahead and drop them. Yep, they did. All right. And our flaps are out. Now we can start diving on in. And this thing here has something to do with setting up the bombing runs. I'm not sure how that works, but when I rolled over it, when you could see what everything was, it said it had something to do with being a bombing altimeter. Alright, so now I got to give it the throttle, or we're going to come in too slow and dive down too much. I've got almost full back pressure on the stick right now, and I'm trimmed up pretty high too. So I've gone back to full throttle. And keep an eye on that airspeed indicator. Look what's going on with that, with these flaps and the speed brake out. Alright, now we got an 8-knot crosswind. I just can't imagine why the airport we get all the markings on here but not have any tarmac. That was really strange. And even the natural landscape seemed to be way more hilly than it actually is too. Alright. Well, look at that, we were under the stall speed and it still took a little hop. Okay, so flaps up before we start braking. And apply the brakes. Yeah, this thing is fun to try and land. I haven't landed it yet, just a smooth touchdown, but this is probably only the maybe 7th or 8th time I've tried it. Alright, speed brakes back in. And, well, there is a turn off there, but I've had full brakes on since we brought the flaps up. Not real strong brakes on this thing. Alright, we'll just turn off over here and we'll take a look at the little nav map. We'll go to the right. If we can get slowed down, let's go to the left. It looks like we're pointing that way anyway. I've still got full brakes on. Gee whiz. Okay. That's alright. Alright, that airport is far away, so I'm just going to pull up on whatever this white thing is right here in front of us. Then we'll park it there. Hang around for just a minute. You do not want to miss this tour on the satellite map. There is some cool stuff to see out here. Man, I hope I can brake in time before we drive off the end of this thing. Almost feels like I need a parachute or something. Alright. Alright, you can stop whenever you want. There you go. Okay, so parking brake on, and then to shut the engine off, all we have to do is click that little click spot again, and we're good. So let's go ahead and get that to, I guess we can shut that off. We'll turn our external power back on. That's parking brake on. Canopy open. There we go. I love the sound of the generator. For some reason, when you stop, check this out. There's no generator when you're stopped, only before you take off. But you can still hear it. Maybe that'll come in an update. Alright, so here we go. Turn off our centering, turn off our airplane trail, and you can tell I wasn't following our track very closely. I was just using it for general guidance. Okay, so here we go. Here's where we took off from, and as we came around over here, just a couple things to point out, some more modern stuff. This is their big convention center, totally flat, just a big square in the sim, so I did not point that out. Here's the stadium, also pretty flat. Here is the Grand Mosque, which I think is the big mosque for the city out here, and you can tell it is definitely grand. Really big. Let's just keep going along our flight route. Here's the Royal Office, which is kind of like their Capitol building, I think, when I was trying to decipher what that was saying. And boy, they don't spare any expenses on the gardens. Look at these things. And why the heck would you make a straight road right down there when you could plant all these trees and make everybody really think about driving up there? Awesome. And then we came out here along the coast. So here are those big government buildings. That one looked accurate. This one looked accurate. And then this is the hotel, which was just a flat circle in there. So that one wasn't right. But these two things were definitely right. And that was pretty much spot on. They got a big obelisk out there, too. So those are both government offices. Then we came up here. Check this out. This is one of the palaces for the Sultan. Look at that thing. So that must be his driveway, I guess. I mean, look at the size of that. Are there any cars down there so we can get a frame of reference? Oh, here's some cars down here. Look how big that is. And then here's two of the forts, two of the older forts that were... I'm guessing this was probably one of the original harbors out here because there aren't any big forts, really. There's a tiny one over at that other one we'll look at in a minute, but they do have these two little forts here. And again, I didn't fly close enough to really see if you could get details, but we certainly could with that other one, and these don't have a bunch of stuff in the middle of them, so you might be able to spot them even better. And then here's that National Museum, which looked about like that in the sim. All right, coming over here to the main port, here's one little fort right here, which would probably be really tough to pick that one out. And of course, all along the coast, they got little parks and stuff down there. And then we come over this way. This is their Department of Petroleum building. Look at that thing. Man, oh man. And all the government buildings look just like that. It's crazy. And then here's that big park I was telling you about. So there's the amphitheater, and here's the amusement park. I'm guessing that's probably not real detailed in the sim either, but you can definitely tell that's what it is there. And then they got another little amphitheater right over here. That's the other one. Coming down here, these are some more government buildings, all of them very opulent. Oh boy, they're building something big there. I bet that's going to be special. Look at that road going up to that with a roundabout in front of it and everything. But all of these here, right along here, are government buildings. Every one of these things. All this stuff back here. Department of this, Department of that. All of them look way overbuilt, but they must be pulling in some money from all that oil. And this thing here is a 5-star hotel. Right along the coast. Looks beautiful. Was not that detailed in the sim, though. Okay, so there's the Grand Mosque again. Coming over here, here's the airport, the golf course, and then this thing here is their Aviation Authority complex. And all of these are also ridiculously overbuilt buildings. Look at that. And it looks like they're throwing a lot more in there, too. That's a cool looking building, though, isn't it? Really neat. Okay, so here is their mall, and you know what? That university was not on the complex of the palace. I thought that's what that was, but that must have been something else. And I don't know what this is, because there was nothing in Google, but I don't know if it's a private residence or what, but that looks pretty impressive. Whatever it is, it's not a government building. At least it wasn't marked as one. And they called this a technical school of some kind. And this is that dam that I showed you before as we were coming by, which had water in it in the sim. And then here's this palace. This is the big one. Look at that. So what do you think these are, like guest houses or something? You know this guy's greasing some palms out here. Look at that. Incredible. And this is indeed the prison. I mean, I knew that for sure. These are prisons here. So that looks like a school of some kind. Maybe it is another university, because they got fields and everything down there. And then here's where they got like an opera house and a symphony down here. So these may all be fine arts facilities down here, with a couple helipads too, it looks like. All right, so there's an actual horse racing course there, just to frame how gigantic this camel racing course is. Look at this thing. Look at that. Insanely huge. All right, so here's one of the other castles. Look at this one. This one looks a lot more like... This one was built in the early 1800s, and it looks very good. Not run down at all, so that's a really nice looking place there. And apparently they've turned into a theater now, I think I read on the internet for that one. So the chicken coop was this little thing right here. There it is. There's the chicken coop. And then here's that state police facility. Also pretty good sized. Also with an overly built headquarters. Look at that. And this is a football field in real life, or a soccer pitch, I guess, because it's green on the Google map. So that was, maybe they're changing the turf out. And then here's our fortress that we saw, which really looked just like that in the sim. I mean, you can tell with all that stuff in the middle, it's hard to pick out, but you could see this wall right here. You could see this turret here, the outside wall. So if you get nice and close to that one, you will see it. Just look for this little patch of brown sticking up in the green. That's where it'll be. And there's one more really nice looking fortress here. Look at that place. Oh man, that shadow makes it a little bit harder to see. The Google map, it's even clearer than that. But let's jump over here real quick, just in case you want to take a little bit different route. Along this little mountain pass over here, there's some more fortresses. This one is really nice. Look at that one. And as always, this bookmark file will be included in the video description as well, so if you want to load it up into a little NavMap, it'll bring in not just the bookmarks for this flight, but all of them that we've ever taken. There's that military base, which looked just like that in the sim, and here's where that mountain runway is. And all of these things around here, as far as I could tell, are resorts. So if you're coming in from this direction, which I was, it's really, really hard approach because you got to come right over the top of these mountains and then lose enough speed to get down on that thing in time and stop at 2,300 feet of runway, which is not easy to do unless you're flying a really slow plane. But that was neat. If you're flying a smaller plane, I'll encourage you to check that out because it was a cool approach. So we flew up into the mountain here. Here's where the big mountain was. And I want to see if we can see. They got all kinds of little like mud huts and stuff that were built all around the top of this. This is that thing they bombed into oblivion when they had that uprising. But I'm not seeing anything. They look like they were tucked down in all these nooks and crannies, so they may just be too small to see in here. Then we came on up out of the bowl, and there's another fort here, which we were too far away to be able to see, but that one looks pretty good too. Boy, these shadows in little NavMap are a little bit more pronounced than they were on the Google map. And then we came in for our approach. And I got another little dirt strip down there, but we don't want to land this thing in the dirt. We don't want to suck all that in the engines. And that was it. So you can see, I mean, I guess, well, let's just measure it. Let's see here how long that would be in real life. So 15, yeah, that would be, if you use the whole runway, that would be bigger than the one at the Kennedy Space Center, because that one's 14,000 feet, although this one's a little bit narrower. I think that one's about 150 feet wide. This one's 137 wide, which is actually a bit narrow for a runway that long. I think they're usually around 150 for those real big strips. But that's that. That's Oman, guys. Thank you so much for the recommendation. Totally cool flight. I think our next one is going to be in El Paso. If you have any recommendations, you don't have to be a member of the Discord server. Just drop me a line, let me know in the comments. Or just say hi in the comments. That's great. But if you want to join the Discord server, that's where you can get involved in the competition. And the winner will get a gift card to the sim vendor of your choice. And we'll vote on that as a Discord community here in about another 4 weeks or so. Had an absolute blast as always, and I cannot wait to see you all again in the skies. Later.